The Galactic Academy floated high above the shining world of Verex Prime. It was one of the most famous schools in the galaxy. The children of generals studied there. The sons and daughters of senators studied there. Future leaders from hundreds of alien worlds sat inside its classrooms every day. The academy was protected by powerful shields, advanced security systems, and thousands of armed guards. Everyone believed the school was untouchable. No criminal would ever dare attack it. No assassin would ever dare enter it. At least, that was what everyone thought. On a quiet morning, Class 7A sat inside a large history room. Sunlight from a nearby star poured through giant windows. Outside, flying vehicles moved between massive towers that stretched high into clouds. Inside, students listened to Professor Neeler, an elderly blue-skinned alien with 4 eyes. He stood at the front of the room and pointed toward a holographic image floating above his desk. The Great Orion conflict lasted for 12 years, he explained. Most students paid attention. Some secretly looked at their tablets. A few stared out the windows. Among them sat Ethan Walker, the only human in the classroom. He leaned back in his chair with one hand under his chin. Like always, he looked completely relaxed. The other students often found him strange. Humans had a reputation across the galaxy. They came from Earth, a dangerous death world filled with storms, predators, diseases, earthquakes, and countless other threats. Most species could not survive a single week there, yet humans called it home. Even so, Ethan never acted dangerous. He joked with classmates. He smiled often. He rarely seemed worried about anything. Some students thought the stories about humans were exaggerated. Others were not so sure. The lesson continued peacefully. Then everything changed. A loud alarm suddenly echoed through the academy. Beep, beep, beep. The classroom froze. Professor Neeler stopped speaking. Students exchanged nervous looks. The academy almost never activated emergency alarms. Something had gone very wrong. "What is happening?" one student whispered. "I don't know," another answered. The professor activated his communicator. Nothing happened. The signal was dead. A bad feeling spread through the room. Then came another sound. Heavy footsteps. Slow, powerful, getting closer. Thud, thud, thud. The sound echoed through the hallway outside. Everyone heard it. Every student became silent. The footsteps stopped directly outside the classroom door. Nobody breathed. Nobody moved. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, boom, the classroom door exploded inward. Metal fragments flew across the room. Students screamed. Several jumped from their seats. Smoke filled the entrance. Professor Neeler stumbled backward. His face turned pale. A giant figure stepped through the smoke. The room instantly became silent. The newcomer was over 7 feet tall. Dark armor covered his entire body. Scars marked the metal plates. A long energy blade hung at his side. In his hands rested a massive plasma rifle. His helmet slowly turned toward the students. Glowing red eyes stared from behind the visor. Many students immediately recognized him. And when they did, fear spread through the room like wildfire. "No!" one student whispered. "It can't be." Another student nearly fainted. Professor Neeler's hands began shaking. He knew exactly who this was. Everyone did. Croft Vorn, the most feared assassin in the galaxy. Stories about him existed on nearly every world. Entire governments feared him. Military leaders feared him. Crime syndicates feared him. Nobody knew exactly how many people he had killed. Some said thousands. Others claimed tens of thousands. What everyone agreed on was simple. If Croft Vorn appeared in front of you, you were probably going to die. The assassin slowly walked into the classroom. Thud, thud, thud. Each step sounded heavier than the last. Students backed away. Some hid beneath their desks. Others simply froze. Fear controlled every movement. Croft scanned the room. His glowing eyes moved from student to student, like a predator searching for prey. Finally, he raised his plasma rifle. The weapon hummed with deadly energy. Several students began crying. Professor Neeler raised his hands. "Please," he stammered. "These are only children." Croft ignored him. The assassin continued studying the room. Nobody dared speak. Nobody dared move. The classroom felt trapped. Then something unexpected happened. A strange sound broke the silence. A laugh. A real laugh. Not nervous. Not frightened. Amused. Everyone turned toward the source. The sound came from Ethan Walker. The human. He sat calmly in his chair. A smile spread across his face. And then he laughed again. Several students stared at him in horror. Had he lost his mind? The most dangerous assassin in the galaxy stood 10 meters away. People were terrified. Some were crying. Yet Ethan looked as though he had just heard a funny joke. The laughter stopped, but the smile remained. Croft slowly turned his helmet toward him. The glowing red eyes locked onto the human. For a long moment, neither moved. The tension became unbearable. One student quietly whispered, "He's dead." Another nodded. Nobody insulted Croft Vorn and survived. Nobody. The assassin took a step forward. Then another. Soon he stood directly in front of Ethan's desk. The plasma rifle lowered until it pointed straight at the human's chest. The room became completely silent. Everyone waited for the shot. Professor Neeler closed his eyes. Several students looked away. They could not bear to watch. But Ethan didn't move. He simply looked up at the giant assassin. Then he smiled even wider. Finally he spoke. His voice was calm, almost cheerful. "So you're Croft Vorn?" The assassin remained silent. Ethan tilted his head. The human crossed his arms. A few students noticed he looked disappointed. Then he said the words that nobody in the room would ever forget. "Honestly," he shrugged, "I expected someone bigger." The entire classroom gasped. Several students nearly fell out of their chairs. Professor Neeler's eyes shot open. Even Croft froze. For the first time in many years, someone had mocked him to his face. And that someone was a human. The assassin's red eyes narrowed. The plasma rifle remained aimed at Ethan's heart. But now something else appeared in the room. Curiosity. Because the galaxy's deadliest killer had seen fear thousands of times. He had seen people beg. He had seen people cry. He had seen people run. But he had never seen anyone laugh. Especially not a human sitting alone in a classroom. And deep down, Croft Vorn suddenly found himself wondering one thing. Why wasn't the human afraid? The classroom remained frozen. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The only sound came from the low hum of Croft Vorn's plasma rifle. The deadly weapon was still pointed directly at Ethan Walker's chest. Most students could hardly breathe. They expected the human to be dead already. Instead, Ethan sat comfortably in his chair. His smile had not disappeared. That made the situation even more terrifying. Professor Neeler stared at him in disbelief. The old teacher had spent decades studying galactic history. He had read reports about wars, assassinations, and famous battles. He knew exactly who Croft Vorn was. Entire governments had surrendered rather than face him. Military commanders had abandoned planets after hearing he was coming. Yet somehow, one young human student looked completely relaxed. The situation made no sense. Croft slowly lowered his weapon a few inches. Not because he was showing mercy. Because he was curious. Very curious. The assassin studied Ethan carefully. Humans were still relatively new to the galactic community. Many species viewed them as strange creatures. Others viewed them as dangerous. But Croft had never met one personally. This human certainly looked ordinary. He wasn't wearing armor. He carried no weapon. He wasn't especially large compared to some alien species. Yet there was something unusual about him. Something Croft couldn't identify. The assassin finally spoke. His voice was deep and cold. "What is your name?" The room became silent again. Everyone waited for Ethan's answer. The human leaned back casually. "Ethan Walker." Croft stared. "Ethan Walker, what world?" "Earth." Several students immediately exchanged nervous looks. The word itself carried weight. Earth, the famous Deathworld. A planet that sounded more like a nightmare than home. Croft remained silent for several seconds. Then he nodded slightly. "So the stories are true." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Which stories?" "The stories about humans." The human laughed softly. "There are a lot of stories." The assassin stepped closer. Stories that say humans do not fear death. A few students nervously looked at Ethan. Now, they were wondering the same thing. How could anyone remain calm in this situation? Ethan shrugged. That's not true. Croft tilted his head. No. Nope. The human smiled. Humans fear death all the time. The classroom became confused. Even Croft seemed surprised. Then why aren't you afraid? Ethan looked directly into the assassin's glowing eyes. Because you're standing there talking. The room fell silent. Nobody understood. Croft narrowed his eyes. What does that mean? Ethan shrugged again. If you wanted me dead, I'd already be dead. Several students almost choked. The human was speaking to the galaxy's deadliest assassin, as if they were having a casual conversation. The situation felt unreal. For the first time in years, Croft didn't know how to respond. Before he could answer, a frightened student suddenly stood up. He belonged to a small reptilian species. His scales were trembling. Please, he said. Please don't kill us. Croft immediately turned toward him. The student froze. Fear filled his eyes. Now this was familiar. This was what Croft expected. Fear, terror, desperation. The assassin pointed the rifle toward the frightened student. Instantly the room erupted into panic. Several students screamed. Others ducked behind desks. Professor Neeler stepped forward. No! Croft ignored him. His finger touched the trigger. The plasma rifle began glowing brighter. The reptilian student started shaking uncontrollably. Then, Ethan yawned. A loud, obvious yawn. The entire classroom turned toward him. Even Croft looked annoyed. Ethan stretched his arms. Then he looked at the assassin. You know, he said casually, you really like dramatic entrances. Several students nearly fainted. Professor Neeler wanted to scream. Did the human have any survival instincts at all? Croft slowly turned toward him. Do you think this is a joke? Ethan thought for a moment. Honestly, yes. A little. The classroom gasped again. Croft's patience was beginning to disappear. For years he had built his reputation through fear. Entire planets knew his name. Entire armies feared his arrival. Yet somehow this human treated him like an annoying interruption. The assassin decided to make a point. Without warning, he fired. Boom! The plasma bolt exploded into the ceiling. The blast shook the room. Metal fragments rained onto the floor. Students screamed. Several dropped beneath their desks. The teacher stumbled backward. Smoke filled the air. The blast mark above looked large enough to destroy a vehicle. Slowly, the smoke cleared. Croft scanned the room. Every student looked terrified. Every student except one. Ethan sat exactly where he had been before. He hadn't even flinched. Not even a little. The assassin stared. That wasn't normal. Even trained soldiers reacted to sudden gunfire. Even experienced warriors blinked. The human hadn't moved. It was as though the explosion had never happened. Something about that bothered Croft. A lot. The assassin lowered his rifle. Why? The question surprised everyone. Ethan looked confused. Why what? Why didn't you react? The human thought about it. Then he smiled. Because I've heard louder. The classroom became silent. Nobody knew what he meant. Louder than a plasma rifle? That seemed impossible. Croft narrowed his eyes. What kind of world creates people like you? Ethan looked out the giant window. For a moment, his smile softened. Then he answered, the kind that tries to kill us every day. The words sent chills through the room. Many students had heard stories about Earth. Most believed they were exaggerated. Now they weren't so sure. Ethan continued, Earth has hurricanes. Silence. Earth has earthquakes. More silence. Earth has oceans full of predators. Several students swallowed nervously. Earth has diseases, storms, wildfires, floods, wars, and thousands of poisonous creatures. Nobody interrupted. Nobody laughed. Because the human wasn't joking. The classroom suddenly understood something. Humans weren't fearless. They were experienced. They grew up facing dangers that most species could never imagine. Croft himself felt a strange sensation. Respect. Small, but growing. Then suddenly a communicator inside his armor activated. A voice echoed through the helmet. Target confirmed. Every student froze. Croft listened silently. After a moment, he turned back toward the classroom. His red eyes slowly scanned the students. One by one, searching, looking, hunting. The atmosphere changed instantly. Ethan noticed it too. The assassin was no longer curious. He was focused, dangerously focused. Finally, Croft stopped looking. His gaze locked onto someone sitting near the back row, a young alien boy, the son of one of the galaxy's most powerful politicians. The boy's face turned completely pale. Fear filled his eyes, and for the first time since entering the room, Croft smiled, a cold smile, a deadly smile. Then the assassin spoke 4 words that made everyone's blood run cold. I finally found you. The words hit the classroom like a bomb. I finally found you. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Every student followed Croft Warren's gaze toward the back row. There sat a young alien boy with silver skin and bright golden eyes. His name was Lyron Val. Until this moment, most of the class barely noticed him. He was quiet, polite, the son of Senator Val, one of the most powerful leaders in the Galactic Council. Now everyone understood why the assassin had come. Lyron's hands trembled. His face had lost all color. The fear in his eyes was impossible to hide. Croft slowly lowered his rifle toward him. The room instantly became colder. "Stand up," the assassin ordered. Lyron didn't move. He couldn't. His body seemed frozen. Professor Neeler stepped forward despite his fear. "Leave him alone." Croft didn't even look at the teacher. "Move aside." The professor swallowed hard. No. Many students stared at him in surprise. The old teacher was terrified. Everyone could see it. Yet he still stood between the assassin and his student. For a brief moment, Croft seemed almost impressed. Then he raised one armored hand. Without warning, he shoved the professor aside. The old alien crashed into a desk. Students screamed. Several rushed toward him. Professor Neeler groaned but remained conscious. Croft ignored him completely. His attention remained locked on Lyron. "Stand up." The boy slowly rose from his seat. His legs shook so badly that he nearly fell. The assassin nodded. "There you are." Lyron swallowed. What do you want?" Croft smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. "Something your father stole." The classroom became silent. Lyron blinked. "My father?" "Yes." Croft took another step closer. 3 months ago, Senator Val acquired information that does not belong to him. The boy looked confused. "I don't know anything about that." Croft laughed softly. "You don't need to." The assassin pointed toward a small device attached to Lyron's wrist. Several students noticed it for the first time. It looked like an ordinary communication bracelet, but Croft's eyes never left it. "The data is inside that device." Shock spread across the room. Lyron stared at the bracelet. "No." His voice was barely a whisper. "That's impossible." "Is it?" The boy suddenly remembered something. 2 weeks ago, his father had personally given him the bracelet. He had said it was important, very important, and that he must never lose it. At the time, Lyron thought it was just a gift. Now he wasn't so sure. Croft saw the realization appear on the boy's face. The assassin nodded. "You understand now." The classroom remained silent. Every student could feel the danger growing. The mission was no longer random. Croft hadn't entered the academy to kill students. He had come for Lyron. And nothing was more dangerous than an assassin focused on completing a mission. Lyron slowly stepped backward. "What happens if I give it to you?" Croft answered immediately. "You live." Nobody believed him, not even Lyron. The assassin noticed. Wise choice. The boy's breathing became faster. His eyes searched the room, looking for help, looking for hope, finding none. Then suddenly another voice spoke. "That deal sounds terrible." Every head turned. Ethan Walker had spoken. Again, the human remained seated, still relaxed, still calm, as though the entire situation bored him. Croft sighed heavily. "Human?" Ethan smiled. "Assassin?" Several students stared in disbelief. Nobody else would have dared speak, especially now. Croft pointed at Lyron. "This does not concern you." Ethan looked around the room. "Seems like it concerns everybody." "It does not." Pretty sure it does. Croth's patience was disappearing quickly. The assassin stepped toward Ethan. The floor shook beneath his armored boots. Many students backed away. Yet Ethan remained exactly where he was, unmoved, unimpressed. The contrast was becoming almost ridiculous. Croth stopped directly beside his desk. "You are testing my patience." Ethan nodded. "Probably." The assassin stared. The human stared back. Neither looked away. Finally, Croth spoke. "Do you know who I am?" Ethan smiled. "You're famous. Then you understand what I can do." The human thought for a moment. Then he nodded. "Sure." The assassin waited. Ethan continued. "And honestly, that's what worries me." Croth narrowed his eyes. "What worries you?" The human pointed toward the classroom. "You came all this way." Croth remained silent. "You broke into one of the safest schools in the galaxy." Still silence. "You terrified an entire classroom." The assassin nodded slightly. "Yes." Ethan leaned forward, all for one bracelet. The room became quiet. Even Croth seemed surprised by the observation. Ethan's smile slowly faded. For the first time since the assassin arrived, the human looked serious. That immediately caught Croth's attention, because serious people ask dangerous questions. Ethan crossed his arms. "If you're willing to risk this much for that bracelet." His eyes shifted toward Lyron. "Then whatever's inside must be worth a lot more than you're admitting." Nobody spoke. Nobody interrupted. The logic was impossible to ignore. Croth didn't answer immediately. That alone was suspicious. The classroom suddenly realized something important. The assassin wasn't telling the whole truth. Not even close. Lyron noticed it too. Fear mixed with confusion. "What is in the bracelet?" he asked. Croth remained silent. The boy asked again. "What is it?" Still no answer. Then Ethan stood up. For the first time since the assassin arrived, the movement immediately changed the atmosphere. The classroom became tense. Very tense. Because now the human was standing, face to face with the galaxy's deadliest killer. Several students held their breath. Professor Neeler watched from across the room. Even Croth looked curious. Ethan glanced toward Lyron, then toward the assassin. Finally he spoke. "Whatever's in that bracelet." He paused. "I don't think he should give it to you." A shocked silence filled the room. The words sounded simple, but everyone understood what they meant. Ethan had just chosen a side. The human was now standing between the assassin and his target. Croth slowly lowered his head, almost as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. Then he laughed. A cold, dangerous laugh. "You intend to stop me?" Ethan shrugged. "Maybe." The assassin's glowing red eyes narrowed. The classroom felt frozen. Something important had just happened. A line had been crossed. There was no going back now. Croth slowly reached for the energy blade hanging at his side. The weapon began glowing with deadly blue light. Students gasped. Several backed against the walls. Professor Neeler felt his heart pounding, because everyone knew what came next. The assassin was done talking, and for the first time all day, Ethan Walker stopped smiling. The fight was about to begin. The classroom felt frozen in time. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Even the air seemed heavier. Croft Vorn stood in the center of the room, his glowing energy blade humming with deadly power. Across from him stood Ethan Walker, an ordinary-looking human student. At least, that was how he appeared. But appearances could be dangerous, especially when it came to humans. The assassin slowly lifted his blade. Blue light reflected across the classroom walls. Several students backed away. Others hid behind desks. Professor Neeler struggled to stand after being thrown aside earlier. Fear filled his eyes. He had seen warriors fight before. He had watched military champions battle in holographic arenas. But this was different. This was real. And someone was going to get hurt. Croft pointed the blade toward Ethan. "You should sit down, human." Ethan shook his head. "I don't think so. You cannot stop me." "Maybe." The assassin narrowed his eyes. "You continue speaking as if you have a chance." Ethan smiled slightly. "No." Croft looked surprised. "No." The human shrugged. "I speak like someone who doesn't enjoy bullies. Several students exchanged nervous looks. Nobody had ever spoken to Croft like this. Nobody. The assassin slowly stepped forward. His armored boots echoed through the room. Thud, thud, thud. Each step felt like a warning. Each step carried years of violence, years of victories, years of fear. Yet Ethan didn't step back. Not even once. Croft stopped only a few feet away. Last chance. Ethan sighed. You're really dramatic. The assassin attacked. Everything happened instantly. The glowing blade shot forward. Several students screamed. Professor Neeler closed his eyes. The strike should have ended the fight immediately. It should have, but it didn't. Ethan moved. Fast. Far faster than anyone expected. The blade sliced through empty air. Whoosh! Gasps filled the classroom. Croft's eyes widened slightly. The human had dodged. Not barely. Not desperately. Cleanly. Smoothly. Almost casually. The assassin immediately attacked again. The blade flashed through the air. Once. Twice. 3 times. Each strike moved faster than the last. Students could barely follow the motion. Blue light danced across the room. Desks were sliced apart. Metal fragments scattered across the floor. Yet somehow Ethan avoided every attack. Step, turn, lean, move. Simple, efficient, natural. The classroom stared in disbelief. Nobody understood what they were seeing. Humans were strong. Humans were resilient. Everyone knew that. But this looked different. Croft stopped attacking. For the first time, uncertainty appeared in his eyes. The assassin had spent years hunting dangerous targets. Military officers, elite warriors, bodyguards, champions. Most of them failed to dodge even one strike. This human had dodged 6. The silence became uncomfortable. Ethan brushed dust from his shirt. That's it. The room exploded with gasps. Several students nearly fainted. Professor Neeler couldn't believe his ears. Croft slowly straightened. His grip tightened around the blade. The assassin was becoming angry. Very angry. And angry assassins were dangerous. But Ethan didn't seem concerned. He looked more curious than frightened. Finally, Croft spoke. What are you? The question surprised everyone. Even Ethan blinked. What? What are you? The assassin's voice was serious now. No mockery. No threats. Just confusion. Ethan smiled. I'm a student. No. Croft shook his head. You move like a soldier. The human laughed. Nope. You move like a warrior. Nope. You move like a trained fighter. Ethan shrugged. A little. The assassin stared. The answer irritated him. Then Ethan pointed toward the classroom window, toward the distant stars, toward a place far beyond the academy. Where I come from, everybody learns. Croft frowned. Learns what? The human smile disappeared. How to survive. The room became silent. Nobody interrupted. Nobody joked. Something in Ethan's voice had changed. It sounded real. Very real. The human crosses arms. Earth teaches lessons early. Several students listened carefully. Humans fascinated them, but they rarely talked about their homeworld. Ethan continued. Some planets are comfortable. He looked around the room. Many species grow up safe. Several students nodded. That was true. Most worlds were peaceful. Most children rarely face serious danger. Earth was different. Ethan pointed toward himself. Humans fall. Then toward Croft. We get back up. He pointed toward the damaged ceiling. Things break. Then toward the frightened students. People panic. His eyes returned to the assassin. But eventually we learned something. Croft narrowed his eyes. What? Ethan smiled. Danger is normal. The words echoed through the classroom. Danger is normal. Most species could never imagine such a belief. To them, danger was something rare, something terrifying, something to avoid. To humans, it was Tuesday. Croft slowly understood. That was why the human wasn't afraid. Not because he lacked fear, because fear wasn't new. Earth had introduced him to fear long ago. The assassin suddenly felt uneasy, not because Ethan was stronger, Not because Ethan was armed, because Ethan was comfortable. Comfortable in danger. Comfortable under pressure. Comfortable when death stood nearby. That realization bothered Croft more than anything else. The assassin launched forward again, this time faster than before. Much faster. The energy blade flashed toward Ethan's shoulder. The human twisted. The strike missed. Another attack followed immediately. Then another. Then another. The classroom watched in amazement. The battle looked impossible. A giant armored assassin moved with deadly speed. Yet the human continued avoiding every strike. Not through strength. Not through power. Through timing. Awareness. Instinct. Years of experience. Years of surviving a world that never stopped trying to kill its inhabitants. Then something unexpected happened. Croft made a mistake. Just one. A tiny mistake. His blade struck a desk and became stuck for half a second. Most people wouldn't notice. Ethan did. The human stepped forward. Fast. Very fast. Before anyone realized what happened, Ethan grabbed the assassin's wrist. The classroom froze. Nobody believed what they were seeing. A student had touched Croft Vorn, the galaxy's deadliest assassin. Then Ethan moved. A simple motion. Nothing flashy. Nothing dramatic. He shifted his weight and pulled. Croft suddenly lost balance. The giant assassin crashed into the floor. Boom! The entire room shook. Silence followed. Absolute silence. Nobody moved. Nobody blinked. The impossible had just happened. Croft Vorn lay on the ground, for the first time in years, and a human student stood over him. The assassin quickly rolled backward and jumped to his feet, but the damage was done. Everyone had seen it. Everyone. For the first time since entering the classroom, the hunter no longer looked invincible, and deep inside his mind, a dangerous thought began growing, a thought he had not experienced in many years. What if I can't beat him? The classroom was silent. No one spoke. No one even blinked. Moments earlier, they had witnessed something impossible. Croft Vorn, the assassin whose name terrified entire star systems, had been thrown to the floor by a student, a human student. The giant assassin stood slowly. Dust slid from his black armor. His glowing red eyes remained locked on Ethan Walker. But something had changed. The confidence was still there. The danger was still there. Yet now another feeling had appeared. Doubt. A feeling Croft had not experienced in many years. The students noticed it. Professor Neeler noticed it. Even Lyron noticed it. For the first time since entering the classroom, Croft Vorn was being careful. Very careful. Ethan noticed too. The human smiled. "You okay?" Several students nearly choked. Nobody could believe he had actually asked that. Croft stared at him. Then something unexpected happened. The assassin laughed. It wasn't a friendly laugh. It wasn't happy. But it was real. A deep sound echoed through the damaged classroom. "Interesting," Croft said. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "What is—" "You." The human shrugged. "People keep saying that." Croft slowly began walking in circles around him, like a predator studying prey. Or perhaps prey studying a predator. At this point, nobody was completely sure. "You know," Croft said, "I have hunted soldiers stronger than you." Ethan nodded. "Probably. I have killed warriors faster than you. Maybe. I have defeated champions from 27 worlds." Ethan looked unimpressed. "Good for you." The assassin stopped walking. His glowing eyes narrowed. The human's attitude was becoming impossible to understand. Most people would have been terrified. Most people would have begged for mercy. Instead, Ethan acted as if they were discussing homework. Croft pointed his energy blade toward him. "You still aren't afraid?" Ethan thought for a moment. Then he answered honestly. "A little." The classroom became quiet. Even Croft seemed surprised. "A little? Sure." The assassin frowned. "You finally admit it." Ethan nodded. Everybody gets scared. Those words confused many students. Because Ethan certainly didn't look scared. The human glanced around the room. Then his eyes settled on Lyron. The frightened boy still stood near the back wall, shaking, terrified, unsure whether he would survive the day. Ethan pointed toward him. "That's fear." Then he pointed towards several other students. That's fear, too. Many lowered their eyes. Finally, he pointed toward himself. I'm nervous. Croft stared. Nervous? Yep. The assassin almost laughed again. You call this nervous? Ethan smiled. Humans are weird. Several students actually laughed. It was a small laugh, a nervous one, but it broke some of the tension. The room felt slightly lighter. Croft noticed. And strangely, he didn't stop it. Instead, he looked directly at Ethan, then explained something. The human folded his arms. Okay, when I entered this room, the assassin paused. Why did you laugh? The question hung in the air. Every student became curious. They wanted the answer to. Nobody understood why Ethan had laughed when Death walked through the door. For several seconds, the human remained silent. His smile slowly faded. Then he sighed. You really want to know? Yes. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck. The memory seemed distant, old, but important. Finally, he spoke. When I was 12 years old, my family lived near the Pacific Ocean. Most students had no idea what that was, but they listened anyway. A giant storm hit our town. The classroom became silent. Ethan's voice remained calm. The sky turned black. The wind ripped buildings apart. The ocean flooded entire streets. Several students exchanged nervous looks. The description sounded terrifying. The human continued. We lost power. We lost communication. We lost almost everything. Even Croft listened carefully now. One night, Ethan said, the storm became so bad that people thought they were going to die. The room remained silent. Ethan smiled faintly. I remember looking outside. What did you see? Lyron asked quietly. The human chuckled. Chaos. Several students blinked. Trees flying through the air. Houses collapsing. Water everywhere. People screaming. The classroom listened closely. Then Ethan shrugged, and after that came earthquakes. Several students gasped. Croft narrowed his eyes. After the storm? Yep. The assassin looked confused. How is that possible? The human laughed. Earth. A few students laughed too, mostly because they didn't know how else to react. Ethan continued. When you're raised in a place where nature constantly tries to kill you. He paused. You stop expecting life to be easy. The words settled heavily across the room. Even Professor Neeler felt their impact. Humans weren't fearless. They were experienced. Their world taught hard lessons. Very hard lessons. Ethan looked directly at Croft. When you kicked down that door, the assassin waited. You reminded me of Earth. The room fell silent. Croft blinked. What? Ethan nodded. You arrived loudly. A few students smiled. You scared everyone. More smiles appeared. And honestly, the human shrugged. You weren't even the scariest thing I've seen. For a moment, nobody reacted. Then several students burst out laughing. Even Professor Neeler covered his mouth. The tension cracked completely. Croft stood motionless. Then something shocking happened. The assassin laughed too. A real laugh. The sound echoed through the room. Nobody could believe it. The galaxy's deadliest killer was laughing. Not because he was happy. Because he finally understood. The human hadn't laughed out of disrespect. He hadn't laughed because he was brave. He laughed because his entire life had prepared him for moments like this. Compared to Earth, compared to hurricanes, compared to earthquakes, compared to disasters. One angry assassin wasn't enough to break him. The realization settled heavily inside Croft's mind. Humans truly were different. Not stronger, not faster, different. Then suddenly, beep, a warning signal appeared inside Croft's helmet. His eyes narrowed instantly. The laughter vanished. The atmosphere changed again. Danger returned. Fast. The assassin looked toward the classroom window. Something was wrong. Very wrong. Another alert appeared. Then another. Then another. Croft's expression darkened. Ethan noticed immediately. What happened? The assassin didn't answer. His eyes remained fixed on invisible information inside his visor. For the first time all day, the assassin looked worried. Truly worried. Ethan's smile disappeared, because if something could scare Croft Vorn, it had to be dangerous. Very dangerous. Then the assassin whispered words that sent a chill through the entire classroom. "They're here." The room fell silent. Ethan frowned. "Who's here?" Croft slowly turned toward the window. His voice was lower than before, almost tense, almost fearful. "The people I stole the bracelet from." The classroom became silent. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Croft Vorn stood near the shattered window, staring at information only he could see inside his helmet. For the first time since entering the academy, the assassin looked worried. Not angry, not confident, worried. That frightened everyone more than the plasma rifle. Ethan slowly crossed his arms. "You want to explain that?" Croft didn't answer immediately. His glowing red eyes remained fixed on the alerts. Another warning signal appeared. Then another. The assassin cursed quietly. Professor Neeler frowned. "What is happening?" Croft finally looked at the room. "The people who own the information inside that bracelet have arrived." Lyron instinctively grabbed his wrist. The bracelet suddenly felt much heavier. "What information?" he asked. Croft stared at him. Then something surprising happened. The assassin lowered his weapon. Completely. The room gasped. Nobody expected that. Croft took a deep breath. "The truth." Ethan narrowed his eyes. "What truth?" The assassin looked toward the stars beyond the window. "The truth about an enemy hidden from the galaxy." Silence followed. Every student listened. "The data inside that bracelet contains records of an ancient species." Professor Neeler blinked. "Ancient species?" Croft nodded. "A species so dangerous that entire civilizations erased every mention of them." The teacher's face turned pale. He knew what that meant. In galactic history, information was sometimes destroyed, but only when something was considered extremely dangerous. Ethan looked serious now. "No one's that dangerous." Croft slowly turned toward him. "They are." The room became quiet. The assassin continued. "Thousands of years ago, they nearly wiped out every major civilization." Several students swallowed nervously. The war lasted centuries. The casualties reached trillions. The galaxy barely survived. Lyron stared at the bracelet. "And this information proves they're returning?" Croft nodded. "Yes." Nobody spoke. Fear slowly filled the room. Not fear of Croft. Fear of something worse. Much worse. Then suddenly, boom! The entire academy shook. Students screamed. Desks slid across the floor. The giant windows rattled violently. Another explosion followed. Boom! Boom! Emergency alarms immediately activated. Red lights flashed everywhere. Professor Neeler rushed toward the window. His eyes widened. "Oh no!" Everyone looked outside. The sight stole their breath. Massive black warships had appeared above the planet. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Each ship looked enormous. Each ship looked heavily armed. The vessels blocked the sunlight itself. Fear spread through the classroom. Students backed away from the windows. Some began crying. Others stood frozen. Ethan stared at the fleet. "They don't look friendly." Croft's voice became grim. "They aren't." The assassin activated a scanner inside his armor. The results appeared instantly. His face darkened. "It can't be." "What?" Ethan asked. Croft slowly looked at him. They found the bracelet. The classroom immediately understood. The fleet wasn't attacking randomly. It had come for Lyron. It had come for the information. And now it knew exactly where that information was. Suddenly, every communicator inside the academy activated. A deep voice echoed through every speaker. Every hallway, every classroom, every room. "We are the Dominion." The voice sounded cold, ancient, powerful. "Surrender the archive. Resistance will result in planetary destruction." The transmission ended. Silence followed. Complete silence. Several students began crying openly. Professor Neeler sank into a chair. Planetary destruction. Nobody used those words lightly. Nobody. The academy suddenly felt very small, very vulnerable. Lyron looked down at the bracelet. "This is my fault." Ethan immediately shook his head. "No." The boy looked miserable. "They came because of me." No, I should surrender. No. Lyron looked up. The human's voice was firm now, stronger than before. For the first time, Ethan sounded angry. The room noticed. Even Croft noticed. The assassin stared at him. You still intend to fight? Ethan looked out the window, at the giant fleet, at the impossible odds. Then he smiled. The same smile he had shown when the assassin first entered the classroom. A smile that confused everyone. A smile that made danger seem smaller. Croft stared. Then realization appeared. You humans really are insane. The class laughed nervously. Ethan shrugged. Maybe. The assassin shook his head. Hundreds of warships. Yep. Planet-killing weapons. Probably. And you're smiling. Ethan laughed. Welcome to Earth logic. Several students couldn't help laughing too. Even during a crisis. Even while facing destruction. The humans somehow made everyone feel calmer. Croft noticed it. And suddenly he understood something important. This wasn't humanity's greatest strength. Not weapons. Not strength. Not endurance. Hope. Humans carried hope into impossible situations. They refused to surrender. Even when defeat looked certain. Especially when defeat looked certain. The assassin slowly looked around the room. At the frightened students. At the terrified teacher. At Lyron. Then at Ethan. Finally, Croft made a decision. A decision nobody expected. He deactivated his energy blade. The glowing weapon disappeared. Gasps filled the classroom. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Giving up? Croft laughed. No. The assassin extended one armored hand. Joining. The classroom froze. Nobody could believe it. The galaxy's deadliest assassin was offering an alliance to a student. Ethan stared at the hand, then smiled. About time. He shook it. The room erupted into shocked whispers. Professor... Neeler nearly fell out of his chair. Croft looked toward the fleet outside. They'll be here in minutes. Ethan nodded. Then we'd better move. The assassin smirked. You have a plan? The human smiled wider. No. Croft groaned. Several students laughed. Then Ethan pointed toward the door. But humans are really good at making plans while running. Even Croft laughed at that. As alarms continued screaming to the academy, the students watched something incredible happen. A feared assassin and a human Deathworlder, standing side by side, ready to face an enemy powerful enough to threaten entire worlds. Professor Neeler stared at them, and in that moment, he finally understood why the galaxy respected humans. Not because they were stronger, not because they were tougher, but because they never stopped standing up. No matter how impossible the situation became, no matter how terrifying the enemy looked, humans stood, humans fought, humans survived. And as the black warships descended from the sky, one thought echoed through Croft Vorn's mind, a thought he would never admit aloud, a thought that suddenly felt completely true. If the galaxy wanted any chance of surviving what was coming next, it would need humans,